Welcome on in, everyone, to the next episode of the Talking Friars podcast. Ben Fadden, your host here. Thank you for joining on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, wherever you are watching or listening to this episode. Today, we are going to respond, or I am going to respond to a question posed by a fan on Twitter about Seiya Suzuki and if he is worth a 5-year deal worth around 12 to 15 million dollars in his average annual value. This question, credit to Sergio Quintero on Twitter. That is where the question came from. If you have any mailbag questions you want me to answer, go ahead at Talking Friars Twitter and Instagram. In the comment section on YouTube, hit the subscribe button there. Gaslandball.com comments. I try to get back to everyone there. Hit me up. Any questions you have, I'll answer on the show that you want answered on the show. And this one, again, from Sergio, I appreciate it. And his question is if Seiya Suzuki is a worthy investment at 5 years to 12 to 15 million dollars per year, that average annual value on that salary. I'm going to answer that question. Now, my initial answer to this question, I leaned more towards no than yes. If I was AJ Preller, and that was because he hasn't proved it at the major league level, giving 5 years to, what did he give Ha-Seong Kim? He gave Ha-Seong Kim 4 years, and it seems like, he could bounce back this year. He looks jacked, by the way, in that picture that we saw. He looks jacked, so who knows if he bounces back, but last year was definitely not the start to his Padres career that, he wanted, that Padres fans wanted. And 4 years seems like a little bit much. It seemed like too much when that Kim deal happened, and signing another Japanese player who hasn't proved that he can hit big league pitching yet. While Suzuki is projected to be a better player than Kim, I'd still lean towards no as my initial reaction, an initial answer to if Suzuki deserves a 5-year deal from the Padres in the 12 to 15 million dollar range each year. But doing more research, looking at the projections from Fangraphs, looking at stats that Suzuki had in Japan. I already knew those stats, but looking into those more a little bit, watching a little bit, some highlights, I changed my answer towards yes. Is he worth it? Now, that doesn't mean that I would give that to him. Now, I know that seems confusing. Is he worth it? Yes, but I wouldn't necessarily jump at the chance of giving it to him. I'd jump at the chance of giving to him if, and only if, Bryant and Castellanos are already gone from the free agent market. I've mentioned on previous episodes, I'd rather just go with one of those guys that has already proven that they can hit big league pitching at an elite level. Someone like Kris Bryant, who can play multiple positions. He can DH, he can play the infield, he can play the outfield. He's won an MVP before, Rookie of the Year. He's won a World Series, has postseason experience, deep into the postseason experience, playing for, one of the most historic franchises in all sports with the Cubs and then the Giants, making the playoffs there. I'd rather go with the more sure bet, and that's Kris Bryant for me, and then Castellanos, and then Suzuki. Kyle Schwarber is more like a DH option, same thing with Nelson Cruz. But in terms of just Suzuki being worth 12 to 15 million dollars, I lean towards yes after looking at the stats and everything. So let's get to those. Suzuki in 2021 in Japan, his team stunk. His team sucked, but he was that bright spot. He hit 317. He had a 1,069 OPS. He had 38 bombs in 134 games, so he stayed healthy, played most of the games. I'm not sure how many games they play in Japan, but 134. Had over 500 plate appearances, I think. So he stayed healthy. It's a large sample size that year. 38 home runs. I know that it's Japan and it's not the same level of pitching, but that's still impressive nonetheless. Seems like he's an okay fielder. In 2020, he hit 300, so back-to-back seasons he's had entering free agency here post-lockout, hitting over 300. 25 home runs in 2020, 75 RBIs in 118 games, so played a little less. But if he were on the Padres, I wouldn't necessarily need him to play 162 games, obviously. I'd like him to play 140, especially with that DH spot. I mean, obviously, if they get Nelson Cruz, then maybe those games go down, but because Cruz is a better hitter, I think, than Suzuki. And he's just a DH. I mean, that's just where he is. But I think that if he comes to the Padres, I want him to play in that range that he played this past year, 2021, and around 130, 140 games, stay healthy like that. And so 38 home runs will certainly do, especially when they had Tommy Pham hitting only 15 last year, Will Myers hitting 17, Grisham having a down year. They need power, and they need power bad, especially with Hosmer. You don't know what you're really going to get out of him power-wise. It's kind of been up and down. And while Tatis is very, very talented, I don't think that you can bank on him hitting 40-plus home runs every year. I just don't think that's going to happen. Hit 30 to 40 home runs, Fernando, and I'd rather have you just stay healthy, and that's good for me. Be solid defensively. That's good for me. So like I mentioned, Suzuki satisfies that power requirement. He would be less money than Bryant Castellanos. Suzuki, actually, I found this interesting. He lapped the field on his team in home runs last year. He doubled the home runs of any of his teammates in 2021. I think so. Like I mentioned, the 38 home runs. The second highest amount of home runs on his team was 16 home runs for one of his teammates. So lapped his team in home runs. 27 years old, so he's entering the middle of his prime essentially. So that's definitely a positive to look at. Fangraphs, I looked at their projections because when someone comes over from Japan, it's kind of hard to predict. There's some guys that really, really hit, and there's some guys where it's a combination of hit and miss, kind of like Kim last year. He hit defensively, and in terms of hitting, like being a positive, like contributing well the way that they imagined. He was very good defensively, better than Tatis at shortstop. He made some really game-changing plays there. And I think that they should really consider him being a late-game defensive replacement, especially if they're up by more than 3 runs in games, because that's how great he is defensively. Whether that's at second base, who knows if he's the starting second baseman because they deal Hosmer somehow or they just don't play Hosmer. Bob Melvin decides to put Jake at first and Kim at second. Who knows? Or if they, make a trade, who knows? But I think that Japanese guys can be hit or miss, so it's hard to project what they're going to do. So I looked at the Fangraphs and I value what they do, and they definitely used a lot of I think they combined a lot of the Japanese players and their trends and what they did when they got to the big leagues in America. And according to Fangraphs, their Zips projections has Suzuki as a better than league average corner outfielder, but not quite at that all-star level. So I'd be up for that. I don't need him to be an all-star. Paying him $12 to $15 million a year, that's not really like all-star salary per se. That's more like $30 million a year, 25, 30 million a year. But I mean, if you obviously would rather have him be an all-star than not, obviously, duh. But I'd be fine with that. Better than league average corner outfielder. Zips WAR projections for the next 5 years. So that's wins above replacement. 2022, Fangraphs projects him to have a 2.6 WAR, 2023 2.5 WAR, 2024 2.2 WAR, 2025 2.1 WAR, and 2026 1.6 WAR. So that's where my answer to Sergio's question at the beginning about would you give him 5 years for 12 to 15 million? Does he deserve that? I think he deserves the 12 to $15 million AAV range, but I don't know if I give him 5 years, because what if he doesn't prove it and then you're stuck with his contract for another 4 seasons after 2022? I mean, if you put options in there, yeah, I'd be up for that, but like mutual options or something like that, club option, make it, put it in the Padres' hands. So obviously his WAR numbers decrease as the years go on, so that's a little concerning. But I'm not saying, like, these are projections. They don't know. Suzuki doesn't even know, because he hasn't played the games. He doesn't know if he's gonna, end up hitting these WAR numbers or not. It's just a projection. And I believe that each win is worth like $5 million in value. So that means that in terms of 2022, 2023, 2024, 2025, he would be in that $10 to $15 million range, $12 to $15 million range. So I do see that, at least on a yearly basis, yeah, $12 to $15 million does look like it works. So yeah, that's a good range that Sergio put out there. Zip's projections have his contract getting 5 years, $83 million. I believe that includes like the fees that they have to pay to Suzuki's team, which is like over $10 million. So it wouldn't him be getting $83 million, which is the amount Will got on his long-term deal, longer years. But I think that, again, that $12, $15 million AAV range is pretty good. I would not give him 5 years unless it's Padres. They have control over that option-wise. But I do think that he adds power to the lineup, middle of the lineup, bat. He plays okay defense from what I hear, from what I'm looking at stat-wise. And if the projections are anywhere close to that, I'd be up for that. First few years of that deal, being an above-average player, 2-win-plus player, hopefully could get to 3 wins. I'd be up for that. But again, I would rather have Brian or Castellanos before Suzuki. And people could say, hey, Ben, well, why would you pay Castellanos? And I agree. I would be a little bit, hesitant to give Castellanos $30 million a year and all that. Especially when he kind of plays more as a DH candidate, but he would be outfield for me. What I would say to that is, I mean, you've wasted $75 million on Hosmer already in his first 4 years, according to Fangraphs and what he's been actually worth. In his first 4 years base salary, he wasted $75.5 million on Hosmer. He's only earned $4.5 million of that 80 that he's earned. So what's another, $15 million a year? Or excuse me, another $15 million a year for Castellanos, judging the difference between a Castellanos contract at like $30 million a year and Suzuki at like $15 million a year. So what's like the difference there in that? You want to contend, Mr. Seidler, Ron Fowler, you want to do that? I mean, just spend that. Hopefully the luxury tax threshold increases. It's not looking great. The owners, it's going to have to increase more than it is. The owners are really, really not trying to budge at all. I mean, they are literally I mean, the last proposal was like $2 million increase in the luxury tax. They're not budging. The players want like $40 million increase, $30 million increase from the 210 that it was at, because it is acting as a salary cap. It's not, but it is acting like that. So we'll see where that goes. But as for the contract, yeah, $12, $15 million average annual value, that does, it seems like that's what he would be worth and what he'll command. So I'd be down for that. If Brian and Castellanos are gone, Padres bring him in on that type of deal, I'd be up for that. I did want to mention before we get out of here, the playoff probability according to Fangraphs, with Suzuki, 81.1% Padres if they get Suzuki. Without him, it's at 70.4%. So over a 10% gap there, which is interesting. I don't know if Suzuki really does make that huge of a difference. To be quite honest, I think more of a difference. I know we're saying power and you need power, and that is true, especially in the playoffs. I think or playoffs and the whole season. But what I would say I would value more is pitching, just health. I think what's going to determine the success of the season, if the Padres win the division, if they're, the 1 seed in the playoffs, hosting all the way through, I think let's just take it step by step. Make the playoffs. If they make the playoffs, what determines that is the pitching. I think if they stay healthy. If they don't stay healthy, I don't think it's going to matter. I don't think it's going to matter if, the Padres bring in Nelson Cruz, Seiya Suzuki, Nick Castellanos, they trade Hosmer, bring in Matt Olson. That would be great. And maybe you get a wild card spot out of that. But if the pitching staff doesn't stay healthy, I mean, what good is all those offensive players when you're just going to give up a bunch of runs? You're going to have Jake Arrieta's and the Vince Velasquez's, pitching it for you late in the season. So I think the health of the pitching staff is really what's going to dictate that playoff probability percentage. But it would go up. I do agree with Fangraphs. It would go up on paper if Suzuki is in a Padre uniform. Again, out of Japan last week, a couple weeks ago, they did say that the Padres will be targeting him. Kevin Acee of the Union Tribune did say that as well. So they're going to be interested, but if I were Preller, I'd go after Bryant hard before I went after Suzuki. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Hopefully that, gave you some more sense, some more knowledge about what Suzuki is worth. Sergio, thanks for the question. Again, any more questions you have, feel free, hit me up at Talking Friars on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube section, in the comments section for any questions you want me to feature on the podcast. Just say that you do want that, and I'll sure to be include that. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Talking Friars podcast. Have a good night. Let's go Padres. Stay safe out there. See ya.